I'm going to go over 3 years of a nightmare in the city that we moved into after purchasing a house. It was December 2009. My wife and I purchased this house, and in doing so, there were a number of things that were at issue after we moved in here with the actual house in itself. There was fraud and forgery in the house deal. There were many items that were not taken care of. It was just a nightmare. And in that nightmare, a week after we moved in, I was called by our real estate agent stating that the mortgage company wanted to rescind the mortgage due to the fact that the furnace that was installed in this house, there was no inspection done on. Now, with that, for the next 2 months, all I did was deal with the realtors and the work that was not done on the house. About in March, April of 2010 was the first time I was able to actually go outside and do something on the house, in which I took a garden hose and was washing the inside of my patio on the house off, where there was a bird's nest. There was 3 of them actually. The house had been vacant for roughly about 3 years, so there was a good amount of bird nest. I was washing it off, washing it down the driveway, when the neighbor called the police, or called the city. The city came out, saw the water. I guess the time frame was such that in April it began the water conservation. So the city came and gave me a notice, a written notice. Well, in doing so, that written notice was actually step number 2 in issuing notices or violations of any code violations. So number 1, to start with, we moved into the house and I had issues getting electric turned on, or water turned on, and sewer, because the previous owner did not pay his water bill. So it took a few days for that to get taken care of. So I started on a bad foot with the city. The next thing I know, I'm outside putting up security lights, security camera, trying to secure my property. I have no side gate for my backyard, so I have wide open access. Well, every time I was doing something, the neighbor would call the police because he didn't like something. They'd come out, the police would start siding with the neighbor, and for about 2 weeks there, this was going on, and I got tired of it. One time the police showed up. They sided with the neighbor again for me putting up a security camera. I immediately told the police, as well as the neighbor, that that's considered harassment, what they're doing, and that if they keep it up, I will file harassment charges against everybody. I also then put spray paint on a fence piece that was in my backyard that said something about the First Amendment, constitutional rights. And the neighbor called the police again. They showed up. They told me I couldn't put that up, which I actually can, being my First Amendment right, in freedom of speech. Now the police are telling me I can't do that. And I guess they don't understand the constitutional rights of individuals. Because from that point on, it just gets worse and worse. I went to the city, talked to the city manager, explained what was going on, and told him I wanted a meeting. We set up a meeting where I had the police chief as well as the city manager and a number of other people from the city in a meeting, telling them what was going on is harassment and I wanted it stopped. I also asked the police chief if we could have a meeting with the neighbor, which we did so, and it was a peace meeting to stop the harassment. And the problem with the part of the real estate deal was the fact that 4 feet 2 inches of my property is sitting in my neighbor's driveway. So we had an easement problem. And it started with me touching the fence that separates the two properties, which was on my property line, on my property. And that started the police calls, in which the police told me that, or the neighbor said that I was stealing the fence, which was on my property. Police told me to get a survey done and for everybody to leave the fence alone. Went to the police chief. We had a meeting with the neighbor. There was supposed to be nothing done with the fence by the neighbor or by me until I got a property survey. I did get a survey done, which was actually done in it was done in April or May, end of May, beginning of June. I called the police. I had them come and pick a copy up. That same officer, which is the one that, in my opinion, made harassing phone calls to me, prank phone calls, in October for 6 days, and it began the day after we buried my father-in-law. So we have a meeting. Nothing's supposed to be done with the fence. The neighbor's supposed to leave me alone. I leave him alone. I wasn't doing anything. So for the next few months, everything seems to be fine. Of course, there's tension there. The neighbor had his son move in with his wife and 2 daughters. And so there was always tension around. But for the most part, the police stopped with being called by Fred, the neighbor, and coming over and harassing me anymore. So in the meantime, I began to walk my dogs, and I have 2 when we first moved here. We got a 3rd dog. I put them all on leashes. They're all on leashes. I'm walking along the irrigation ditch that runs north and south along Mesa Road. In doing so, I had no problems going up and down the ditch and for months. There was one particular house that I'd walk by that they had 3 dogs. One was loose. One was tied up towards the front of the backyard, and one was tied up on in the back corner of the backyard, where it was able to get out underneath the fence. It also got tied up with its chain in the fence itself and the brush that was right there behind it. I walk my dogs. They get along fine. They would walk up to this dog, and I would walk up to it. It was friendly. And I would release the dog from being caught. It had no water, no food. This went on for months. Then in the month of August of 2011, the folks moved their one dog that was up towards the front of the backyard and moved it towards the other end of the backyard, towards the back area, where it would be able to get out underneath the fence, and in doing so, it would attack me and my dogs. This went on for 4 days straight. August 8th, 9th, 10th, and the 11th. Now, everything that I'm going to say in this video is very well documented with emails, documented with 911 calls, and I have a bunch. There's a bunch in here. Pictures, video, audio, you name it, I got it. My background is mechanic. Diagnosis and troubleshooting is my specialty. I've also got about 10 years of mystery shops, secret mystery shopping, whatever you want to call it, business audits. I do hidden, unrevealed audio, video. I do revealed mystery shops or secret shops and business audits. So I document everything with facts. And that's what this is all about. This is all facts. Now, before we moved to this house, I was already having some medical issues. And in those medical issues, there was some major misdiagnosis and some prescription drugs that they had me on that were not good. They eventually nearly killed me. Now, with that going on, I also had another medical issue where I had feet problems, where I would have issues at a point where I wouldn't be able to walk sometimes. I also had another medical issue. It's called diverticulitis, where I had a colon that was pretty bad. Now, I'm trying to get my medical issues taken care of, trying to get some diagnosis figured out with whatever's going on, which wound up being a condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. there's also a couple of other issues that need to be addressed, and they are being addressed, actually. And they were medical issues. Now, this was only found out after the fact at this date in August of 2011, in which the 8th I get attacked by these dogs, by this dog. I try to call the police, or I do call the police. I call 911. Nobody shows up. On the 9th, same thing happens. I'm walking the dogs, and I get attacked. This time I call 911, and the police do arrive. Now on this day, it's a police car that arrives with a person that is not a police officer, but he's a security officer. He's the nephew of the mayor. That was on a Monday. I was also told that the animal control officer is not on duty on Mondays. That the issue with the dog would be addressed on Tuesday. Tuesday, the 10th, I'm walking along there again. Here we go. I get attacked, 3rd day in a row. I call the police station. The animal control officer answers the phone. I talk to him. He doesn't know anything about it. He eventually shows up. I call 911 and tell him that I'm upset and I want some police out here. Well, they send the animal control officer out, and a police officer shows up. The animal control officer basically says that he'll take care of things. Well, that's fine. I left. I started walking away. I started having some chest pain. Heavy breathing, that mainly. Never had it before. I take a break. I'm up by the high school. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. I went home. I went down to the police station to talk to the chief. Got into the police station and started having some heavy breathing and chesting pains, in which the chief called for paramedics. They showed up, checked me out, said I was having some issues that should be addressed. It looks like they may be signs of a heart attack. I calmed down. I talked to the chief and the animal control officer. They're going to address the issues and take care of the location with the animal. The next day, the 4th day, I'm walking out along that same location, and here I get attacked again. This time I call 911 and want Valencia County Sheriff. They won't come. I want the state police. They won't come because it's in the city. Police officer shows up, animal control officer shows up, and the fire chief shows up. Fire chief shows up because there's a fire hydrant in this backyard. They all three go talk to the owner. The owner gets issued a citation. And in the meantime, I'm up on this ditch bank having an anxiety attack again. A few minutes, I'm on the ground on all fours, having problems breathing. The fire chief pulls up in his pickup truck, talks to me from inside his truck, never got out, asked me if I needed some assistance. First time I said no, second time and third time I said yes. Told him reason being is whatever was happening at the police station the day before is what was going on then. Somebody pulls up, a female in a white car, pulls up, talks to him. She pulls away, fire chief pulls away, and leaves me laying there. Only to find me laying there by the UPS and animal control officer, in which they proceeded to get me medical attention. Now, I wound up at the emergency room later that day thinking that everyone thought I was having a heart attack. It was another anxiety attack. I go to court on this citation or summons that the owner had, and in court, 3 people were also subpoenaed: fire chief, police officer, and the security officer. Now the judge stated for those 3 to give their eyewitness account on the day, the 11th, the summons was issued to the owner. Now, basically word for word, the 3 said the same thing, and stating that they did not see any violation. Which, number one, I have a problem with is they were summoned by the city as witnesses. They're officers of the law. They were under oath. And yet, if there was no problem with the issue the day of the ticket, why was it given out? Only because the animal control officer did his job, and there was a violation of city ordinances. But the fire chief, the police officer, and the security officer all said the same thing. Problem is the judge stated she only wanted to know what happened that day of the summons, and the security officer wasn't even there. And yet he stated there was nothing in violation that he saw. So he lied in court. This is how my experience started in this city. Now, the defendant is related to someone that apparently was a city council person at one time. I won't go any farther. I refuse to go into their municipal court here. That's how this started. Two months later, I'm walking my dogs in a different location. One of my dogs sticks his head in a hole in a fence that any kid could put his head or hand into, and my dog got bit by a pit bull. I reached over the fence and beat that dog off of my dog. In doing so, my dog lost a tooth, got a hole in his face. I got injured ribs, bruised ribs, all documented. Following week, I'm walking in different direction near the same house, and the owner comes out making threats to me. I called 911 and decided that, the experience I had from the previous dog deal was a joke. So I told the 911 operator, with the guy making threats to me right then and there, to forget it. And I just went home. A few minutes later, I have an officer pull up that wants to give me a ticket for my dog leashes being too long. No reference to the threats being made by this other person, which is recorded by someone that has a home security system, and she told me she has it recorded the day that that guy was making the threats. I went to the 911 call center, and they cannot seem to find that call. That's a federal offense. So I'm at home, and this police officer comes to my door wanting to give me tickets for my dog leashes. Then he starts lying to my wife about the dog issue laws, and that I've been told about certain laws, which I never was. So I decided I'd call the chief of the police up and get him over there, and he shows up with the lieutenant. He finally sends this officer on his way, and the other officer that was there too. Now I have police reports. And starting from this time on, the police reports are very biased, very one-sided. The police play major favoritism here. Major favoritism to the local citizens. Now, things that I have here are very well documented. I have the stories, the nightmare stories about how the city does not enforce its animal control laws, and how it plays favoritism with the owners. And I have documents of showing the same owners leaving their dogs run loose. They go to this municipal court. Nothing gets done. And in doing so, the people leave their dogs running loose, and they attack people and other dogs. Now, yes, I take it that the last year, basically, after my raising a lot of hell with this city, and how they don't do anything, and how they do play favoritism, and my threats to suing the city, they have finally taken me for real. Now, the situation is so serious that I have told the city in council meeting, I've gone to the chief, and I've told him, I've warned him. I have a friend that is a federal attorney. She practices civil rights. Her husband is a federal attorney at the Pentagon. Her best friend is a person at the Department of Justice that is the chief of the appellate for the civil rights. And they're getting all of this information. I've gone to the FBI. I've gone to the New Mexico Attorney General's office. They just laugh. They don't do anything. I don't know what it is. It's not big enough. Maybe it's because these cops haven't physically beat me, arrested me, thrown me in jail, handcuffed me. But what they're doing is abuse. Over the years, it's been abuse, serious abuse. Now, this whole thing with the dogs here has been a joke. You got an animal control officer. He can't catch dogs very well. He's also related to my wife as a cousin. My wife's been very well connected to this city. She's had a grandfather that was a chief of police. Her ex-father-in-law was a chief of police here. She worked for the ambulance service when the ex-father-in-law, or ex-father, I don't know what, family member. When he owned the ambulance service, my wife worked for him. Well, she was still in high school. She's got the previous mayor is a cousin. She's got a number of cousins and ex-cousins and ex-in-laws and I don't know who all that's worked for the city in various different positions and still does. We only moved here because of my wife's dad was having to begin dialysis. We only came here to help the family. That's all. I don't care about the politics here. But the politics got into my nose, got into my business. The harassment with the neighbor started it. Then the police started with the harassment. Then the favoritism. When I call the police and expect the police to come because there's dogs that's attacking and them to do something about it, and they don't, yeah, you would get upset too. Especially if you can't run and you have dogs that can run and attack and bite. And the way people leave their dogs around here is they'll let them go hungry for 2, 3, 4 days just to keep them meaner. But people have no regard for the laws around here. And especially if they're related or has connection to the city people. They can get away with anything and everything. I won't go into everything. It's a nightmare. It's a huge nightmare. But when I'm walking down the street with my dogs, trying to stay away from other people and their dogs and their houses and just mind my own business, I'm walking, I'm praying. Dogs come out and attack us. And yet, I call 911, and I've got them recorded. I've got recorded 911 calls. These people have come out that have gotten tickets from their dogs, and they've come out and made threats to me. And yet, I'm the bad guy here. In September, I'm walking my dogs on leashes, getting ready to go to Albuquerque to see my attorney for disability because of my medical conditions. 83 days in the year of 2012, I wound up in doctor offices, doctor visits. That doesn't include any hospital. I'm walking my dogs, a loose dog, by a couple of girls and getting ready to go to school. Are barking at me and my dogs. This kid pulls up in a car, threatens to kick my fucking ass. He gets out, threatens to kick my fucking ass, mumbling something about the girls and the dogs and I don't know what. I'm in a state of shock. I'm sure the girls were in a state of shock. This guy's making threats to kick my ass. My fucking ass. Let's go. I didn't do anything, but he's coming to threatening me. Eventually what happened is I waited for the police to show up. This guy's throwing rocks at me, making threats to kick my ass, wants to fight me. The police show up, and yet the collusion and it's actually more of a conspiracy with 4 or 5 police. I don't remember how many were there, including the chief. And whatever was said and how it got turned around where I was charged. Now, go get the video from every one of those police officers that was there. They all wear video. The one officer that charged me is no longer there, which seems to be a pattern of this city. The one that charged me or accused me of the dog leashes no longer works for the city. He works at the county. The one that frivolously charged me in September of 2012 no longer works for this city. He works for another county agency. Now, I get charged. In October of 2012, I go to court, or November of 2012, I go to court for the arraignment. I come outside, I'm waiting in the office waiting area to sign the paperwork. I start having a anxiety attack. I'm asked if I need some assistance. I asked the clerk to call the state police and to call my doctor. The local police show up. First one shows up, he tells me to get up off the ground. I told him I wasn't going to deal with him. I wanted the chief. He wouldn't get the chief. He got the lieutenant shows up. The lieutenant takes me into a room. They want to get me some medical attention because they see I'm stressing. I told them I wouldn't be seen by their fire department paramedics because of what their fire chief did, leaving me laying on the ground the year before, needing medical attention. So they called the ambulance. Ambulance service shows up. I unbutton my shirt. I let them take a look at me. They take my vitals. This is on video and audio. I got harassed by these cops for at least 20 minutes, sitting at the courthouse about this medical stuff and about the harassment that's been going on with their problems with their dogs and loose dogs in the city, and these other problems been going on. I signed my paperwork for an attorney. I got up and I left. Next thing I know, a week later, I get a piece of mail from the court saying that I've been charged with disorderly conduct. When I had an anxiety attack, I have it documented that I called my doctor that same day and he prescribed me some other medicine. My doctors have told me I need to move. It's killing me. That was in November of 2012. 29th of September 2012, my father-in-law passed away. We buried him October 4th, 2012. I started getting prank phone calls by someone. 6 days in a row. Then he challenged me, saying I couldn't find out who he was because he had a private number. That night I went home and set myself up an 800 number, knowing that federal law states that all numbers being called to it has to generate a phone number. And in doing so, this company would send me an email with the phone number. So the next day, I wound up being a witness to a case at the municipal court in which the fire chief admitted to an illegal search and seizure in a case, but I wasn't there for that one. I was there for actually one of the neighbors that has the loose dogs consistently, also runs a auto repair on-site business, that he was also running the business out of his house and doing work at his house, disrupting the neighborhood. But he's related to someone in the city, so he gets away with everything. Well, I go home and I get 2 phone calls, prank phone calls from this private number. A few minutes later, I get the emails. I called that number, left a couple messages stating that I got the number and I'm on my way to the police. I went to the police, went to the chief, I gave him the number. When I walked in, he made a comment to me. He stated that he's got something to talk to me about. And in doing so, I gave him the information that I had. He went, looked it up on his computer, came back to his desk and said that this is strange because one of his officers said that I made a phone call to him today and left a message and recognized me by my voice because I didn't leave a name. I only left a message saying that I got his phone number and that it was real easy to find out who was prank phone calling me. The chief was stunned, I was stunned. The next day, I emailed the chief and the city, the mayor, and the council members and told them I wanted an investigation done. I was told that they'll do an internal investigation, and if I wanted an outside party to go to the state police or the county sheriff. I went to the state police, where they refused to do an investigation. I was told by the chief of the city police that was going to do an internal investigation that he asked the state police to do an investigation and he was refused as well. So I went to the FBI and gave them the information. They've done nothing. Basically told me that it was not a case for him. Okay, so I called the chief of the police, of the state police. At the time it was Schilling. Told him that what's going on here is very wrong. And he acknowledged that it was and was sending somebody over to get the information that I had. An officer came to my house, got the information. 4 months later, I find out that that officer closed the case with no wrongdoing. Well, that's strange because I have a phone number of somebody that was prank phone calling me, and I requested at the time that the investigation would include a subpoenaed record of both phones, mine and the person calling me. It was never done. When I found out that the investigation was closed and there was no wrongdoing, I immediately called Internal Affairs and left a message. The next thing I know, I get a phone call from a lieutenant, Oregon, that was in charge of this county. He said that he would have the investigation reopened. A couple weeks later, I get a phone call stating that he's no longer in this zone and that another officer would be covering. A Lieutenant Salazar. Shortly after that, I was given notice that a Lieutenant Hanuski would be taking over the county. I took the information over to him that I had, and also found that the investigating officer that was ordered to reopen the case got a admission of guilt by the brother of the police officer of the local city, of whom I suspect actually made the phone calls. Now, the problem with this is that earlier in 2012, doing one of my business audits, I went to this tire store that this family owns, that this person that's taking the fall for the person that actually made the phone call runs the shop, the tire shop. And I had actually done in 2011 an audit at the same location. And there was no problems with the audits. I have documentation by the company that their audits were very good. And the officer that's doing the investigation told me that the brother stated that he made the prank phone calls because of the business audit score that he got. Now, see, the problem with this is the mother owns the tire store. She's also the mother of the police officer whom I suspect made the prank phone calls. He's also the same officer that I began contact with in the harassment when it began in 2010. Now, I've got documentation of all of this buildup of what this police officer has done over the years. And it gets worse and worse with the, I'm going to say it, the lies on the police reports. Pull them. Pull every single one of them, and you'll see the pattern. Just like troubleshooting a problem or diagnosing a problem, everything has a pattern. The police call it habits of people. I call it a pattern, whether it's mechanical, electrical, human, everything has a pattern to it. And so does the habit of this police officer in making his police reports, writing misinformation that makes me look like the bad guy. And especially with one individual that's come twice with threats against me, one being I have him on 911 call. You can hear it plainly. I also have pictures of him walking away. But you read the police report. This is from September of 2012. You read the police report, and it doesn't jive with the information that you can hear on the 911 call or the picture. None of it matches. Or earlier this year, in 2013, when the same person came by with his daddy in their truck to my house, making threats with a gun, threatening to shoot me if I walk by his house again. My wife witnesses this. She calls 911. It's all on 911. audio, where these guys are located out in the street, where they're parked and everything. They came to my driveway. I'm in my driveway. They came to my driveway threatening to kick my ass. This person is a bail bondsman. He also has the same expectations as a police officer of the law. Yet he's not controlled under the police academy. He's under the insurance board. Twice he's come to my house. Twice he's made threats to me. Once he came to my house. The other time was out on the ditch. Pull up this police report. Oh my God. It is extremely criminal what the police have written and what he's told the police as well. You see, they don't seem to understand. They do not understand conspiracies. If the police officer made the prank phone calls to me, and then he gets the state police to cover that up, and then because I go pressing to the internal affairs, so now they have the brother take the fall for it, which now saves the police officer's butt. The brother has nothing to lose because he works for the mother. That's called a conspiracy. And then it makes it even worse when you go to this court and there's no representation by an attorney prosecuting cases here. I went to the DA's office. Lemuel Martinez. It's a joke. There's no representation for the state or the people in this county when it comes to court cases, unless it's a DUI or a violent crime. And I'm not talking the municipal, I'm talking the magistrate court, because the city knows I will not deal with this municipal court here. I have a problem with the magistrate court here now. I've gone to the New Mexico Judicial Commission. I've also gone to the New Mexico Bar Association Disciplinary Board about the practice of one of these attorneys here, defense attorneys. Well, after my second complaint about the magistrate judge, I see he's no longer here. I caught him doing criminal acts. I make a complaint, and the Supreme Court of New Mexico, I guess, just slapped his hand and told him to resign early. The governor knows about it. She doesn't probably know why. I have the documentation that shows why. You know, I could go on and on and on with some other issues here. The police corruption here is sick. You had one detective that just lost his commission, police commission, from an incident that happened last year while this was going on. There's another couple that live a couple streets over that was having the same issues with the police, even worse, with the same names that keep popping up. One of those is the same one that started with me with the dog leashes here. These other two, the one with the incident with the anxiety attack in the courthouse, and I was charged with disorderly conduct, he never showed for court. You know, I was a victim. I actually got the neighbor charged with harassment, finally, after threats and stealing and thefting and just everything that he did. He finally got charged with theft. Problem is this court date is the same date I had my surgery, October 4th, in which the state cop never showed for the harassment with the police officer, or with the police officer's brother that made the phone prank calls. It wasn't the brother that did it. I know who did it. He doesn't deserve to be a police officer. But let me tell you a story. I spent 5 months putting documents, 3,000 plus pages together, along with the audio, the video. This year, to sue the city. I have enough to sue the city, including the fact of the city's attorney, Marcus Rayel, sending me a letter stating that I'm not allowed in any of the city buildings. Well, sir, let me say this. You say you practice civil rights. You also practice defending police civil rights. You sure knows how to violate civil rights as well, don't you? Everything that's been happening over here, the 3 years of it, is a violation of my rights. I know these other people that have got the same things going on. They've got a lawsuit against the city. If you start doing your homework, folks, you start doing a history lesson about the harassment and the lawsuits in this city, you're going to see the same names keep popping up. Some of them aren't there. Some of them are. 3 years ago, it cost the city a few $1,000,000 for one. I'm sure the one that got his head smashed into the ground by the detective that lost his police commission last year, it was just in the newspaper recently. I bet that's going to cost the city a pretty penny as well. I know the folks around the corner here, I know that's going to cost the city a pretty penny too. A lot of harassment, a lot of civil rights violations. I was going to do the same. I was going to sue the city. But I have a change of heart. You see, when I was on the ground in August of 2011, sucking wind, in which they thought I was having a heart attack. I had a vision, an apparition, whatever you want to call it. I had something standing over me telling me, get off those drugs, being those psychotropic drugs that these misdiagnosis of these doctors had me on, that almost killed me. Literally almost killed me. August 2011. Get off those drugs. Get off those drugs. That's all I heard. Thyroid. Thyroid. Three months later, I gave my life to God, to Jesus Christ as my Savior. I was at the same time fighting a condition called diverticulitis. I was also trying to find out what my real problem was that was going on, that these doctors had me misdiagnosed severely with and put me on drugs that were killing me, and literally almost did. If I had one of my high-performance bikes running, I would have probably taken one at about 160 miles an hour into a concrete embankment. With the house mess, the police harassment mess, the neighbor harassment, my medical stuff was everything. July of this year, 2013, I wound up at the hospital, emergency room. My fourth diverticulitis attack this year. The hospital didn't do anything. In December of 2011, I actually have a acupuncturist, a doctor of Oriental medicine, that actually diagnosed my problem in being, it's a thyroid condition, and it's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an autoimmune disease, or a condition. It's not a disease. It's an autoimmune condition in which your immune system actually attacks a perfectly good thyroid. The doctors don't know why. There's no cure for it. Western medicine only treats it with thyroid supplement. The most prescribed medicine you'll find in Western civilization is basically a thyroid medicine. Synthroid, levothyroxine, and there's many others. I've had to go through 3 endocrinologists. The first 2 I found doing either medical fraud, billing, or malpractice. So this hasn't been a game to me. Earlier this year, I thought I was going to die. I really did. I didn't think I'd make it to the end of the year. And thank God I finally found a surgeon that on October 4th he could have cut out about a foot of colon. It had started attaching itself to other organs, which were all inflamed, creating other problems. It had collapsed on itself on the inside and was connecting on the inside of itself. It was ugly. And my body so inflamed, my liver was so inflamed that the heat actually goes to your feet first, which is where the body tries to cool it off by growing bone spurs. My feet look like trash. And I have problems walking. And yet, I'm supposed to try and run from these dogs that are running loose around here? My change of heart is this. I've decided that I'm not going to sue the city. What happened is I went on a journey. Some call it a out-of-body experience, a near-death experience, whatever you want to call it. I went on a spiritual journey. See, more than a week after my surgery, I believe I had a heart attack. And in that experience, I saw what I believe was heaven. And I had real conversation with God. And God told me to let it all go. Let it go. And learn to forgive. That I have to forgive all of those that I've had to deal with this nightmare of a living hell in this city. And that He would take care of my problems. You can say whatever you want, you call me whatever you want, but in the severity of things, if you were in my shoes and went through what I did with these police in this city, ,99% of the people would sue. I'm not going to. I'm letting it go. I'm forgiving all of them. I've actually forgiven them. Those that did this and treated me the way that they did, they need prayer. They need lots of prayer. They need lots of love. Because what is it that can make these people do the things that they did? God will take care of it. I'm not going to worry about it. I've let it go. If anybody wants any of this information, I did have a bunch of them made. I'm getting rid of them. I gave a set to the city. The city doesn't want to have anything to do with me with the forgiveness, which is fine. That's their deal. I have everything documented. God bless.